Okay, I think we can get started. My name is Kevin Sutter, and I'm with IBM. I'm also one of the project leads for Eclipse MicroProfile. I'm also on the PMC for the new move of Java EE to the Eclipse Foundation. So pretty much involved with a lot of these aspects. One thing I want to point out, Emily and I, Emily Jiang is also from IBM. She and I, we submitted our talks independently, and it turned out that we both got accepted, and we both had kind of the same thing that we wanted to talk about, and it was related to MicroProfile and demonstrating it with our Liberty product. One thing that everyone is finding out is that these sessions are really short. So trying to get the information in plus showing a demo has been very difficult, and in some cases, the demos haven't been going very well. So what we are actually doing, we're kind of splitting our two sessions. So just to let you know, I plan to give more of the background on MicroProfile and then the eventual integration or relationship with Java EE and in the E4J effort. And then immediately following this is Emily's presentation. And it's just down the hall past the restaurant here. And that's, yeah, like I said, it was immediately after. And Emily is going to focus more on live code demos. So she's going to show MicroProfile in action, how to easily modify an application, have it up and running on our WebSphere Liberty product, and demonstrate the capabilities. So this is kind of like our start of the MicroProfile days at EclipseCon. And so tonight we're having a BOF. It was not scheduled early enough to be on the electronic schedule, but we have put it out on that whiteboard. So tonight, after dinner in the Seminarian Room 5, we're going to have a BOF. So if you are just learning stuff today, or you want to have additional questions answered, come to the BOF tonight. It'll be very informal, just sitting around the table and getting some information or sharing information. And then this continues tomorrow. We have two more sessions tomorrow. One is Heiko Rupp, and he's from Red Hat, and he's going to be talking about our metrics feature of MicroProfile 1.2. And then Emily again has one more session tomorrow on config. So it's a busy day or two related to MicroProfile. So hopefully you kind of get the information you're looking for. If not, look us up. We're both on Twitter, so you can contact us that way or through email. Come in through our GitHub repository any way you want to. Okay, so this is a chart that we used at Java 1, and I think it just kind of pulls everything together about how exciting of times we're in. The move of MicroProfile to Eclipse, we did that early in 2017. And then later, in 2017, right before Java 1, Oracle announced that they're going to be moving Java EE to Eclipse. So Eclipse Foundation is getting very popular. If you listen to Mike Milinkovic's talk the other day, he kind of said that, we're like a 10-year-old overnight success story. It's like all of a sudden we're the poster child and we're getting all of this attention. But it's very good. It speaks volumes about Eclipse, the capabilities they provide, the governance they provide, the whole community aspect. It's been working out very good for us from a MicroProfile perspective, and I'm sure eventually it will work out good with the Java EE effort. Over here on the right, this just shows the different partners that are working on MicroProfile. And this continues to grow. We continue to work with new vendors, new companies, new individuals. One thing that this doesn't show are all of the individuals that also participate. So we've got several key industry people that are also participating in MicroProfile. And then down here in this corner, this shows the big release that we had for Java 1. MicroProfile 1.2, and it contains 5 new features for MicroProfile. I'm going to go into more detail on that later, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here on this. So just to give you a little bit of background, MicroProfile started back here mid 2016, but we didn't become a project at Eclipse until early 2017. Just prior to us getting into Eclipse, we actually released MicroProfile 1.0 in the fall of 2016. At that time, we just defined 3 Java EE specifications that made up MicroProfile 1.0. And what the idea there is, what is the minimum set of capabilities that are required to create a microservice? And yes, we had a lot of different arguments, a lot of different input, but we tried to make it simple, 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 and we said, okay, what's the minimum? And this is what we came up with. We need JAX-RS for RESTful services, CDI as our component model, and JSON-P for parsing JSON documents. So that's what we defined as being the minimum. Now, after we got into Eclipse, it took us a little bit to get our feet going and make sure that everything was on the same page. So it took us a little while to come out with MicroProfile 1.1. We were originally trying to push for a release every quarter. And just because of the startup costs of getting going with Eclipse, we didn't quite make that. So it was late summer when we came out with MicroProfile 1.1. And all that we did at that point, we said, okay, it's a train, and it says we're leaving, we're going with MicroProfile 1.1, what's ready? And the only one that was ready at that time was config. Now, these other ones that eventually made it into MicroProfile 1.2, all of these were in various states of development, but they weren't quite ready to be released. So, MicroProfile 1.1 came out with just the configuration API. Now, just shortly after that, we decided we needed another release before Java 1. We need to make this real before we go to Java 1 so that we all have something to talk about. And all the different vendors, all the people, the companies on the previous slide, we were all in agreement that we need to do something because we need a bigger splash at Java 1 this year. So we all pushed and defined MicroProfile 1.2. And these are the 5 new features that were defined for that. Config had a slight update, so that went up to 1.1. Fault tolerance 1.0, health check 1.0, metrics 1.0, and JWT propagation 1.0. And again, I'll have more information on what each of these are. But what I'm trying to show here is our progression and how we are trying to get on track for doing 1 release per quarter. So now we're looking at the 4th quarter, and we just had a discussion last week. Okay, so what direction are we going to take here? We had 2 different ideas here. We have MicroProfile 1.3, so we could continue on our same path and just add new capabilities to our current stack. Or the question that's coming up is, well, do we need to move to MicroProfile 2.0 because Java EE 8 is available, and there's updates to all of these specifications that we originally had over here from Java EE 7. So we've been discussing this, and the current thought is all the different vendors that we have that are working on MicroProfile, we're not really ready yet to claim support for implementations of all of these. We have different versions of them, but they're not ready to claim support for all of them. So we're going to push this out into 2018, and we're going to focus on a MicroProfile 1.3 release in 4th quarter. Again, it will be a train. These are the items that are currently in play, but they may not all make it. There may be other ones. There may be some extra effort on JWT because of input that we've received since Java 1. Maybe there will be an update. So the exact content has not been defined, but that's what we're shooting for, is a 1.3 update. I've already kind of talked a little bit about the contents of 1.2. I still have charts here. Whoop, pushing the wrong button. I have charts that'll go into detail on each of these. The thing that I want to point out with this particular chart is the config 1.1. I mentioned that there was a slight update that we did for the configuration API. What was really neat about this is the lead for config was Emily, and she was pretty darn busy with fault tolerance. But there were some items that were kind of getting queued up for an update on config. We were able to easily allow another person take the lead. So it shows the community aspect. We were not tied up because Emily was too busy and we couldn't, the efforts didn't have to serialize. Someone else could pick up the config, do the updates that were necessary, and push it forward. So that was pretty key to show the community. I'm supposed to be at work, I guess. There we go. Okay. Hope you're not expecting me to dance. I don't know. They must be practicing for later. Okay, so now give you a little bit of background on MicroProfile. I've mentioned the multiple vendors. That is very key. We're not driven by a single vendor. And yes, IBM's involved, Red Hat's involved. We have a lot of investment in an application server. We want them to succeed. I mean, I'm not trying to hide that. But we do have other vendors and we're all working together. I mentioned how the config 1.1 was picked up by someone else. He's more or less an independent. John Ammett, he works on an Apache Hammock, and he wanted to drive that through. There's an independent that picked it up, along with the other people that picked up these other 5 items down here at the bottom. So very vendor-neutral programming model. Our goal is to define a programming model for fault-tolerant, scalable microservices. That's where the micro comes from. There's some confusion. Some people think, oh, let's see, we have the web profile in Java EE, so MicroProfile must be even a smaller piece of Java EE. Well, even though we started out that way because we only picked 3 features of Java EE, we have since grown to include these additional items that are not part of Java EE. So that's one thing to get across. We complement Java EE. We are not trying to compete with Java EE, and as I mentioned, we utilize some of the features from Java EE that apply to the microservice cloud environment. Each of these items down here, the configuration, fault tolerance, health check, metrics, and JWT propagation, these are the 5 items that we focused on for MicroProfile 1.2. As I mentioned, it was released just before Java 1. Put in a little plug for our efforts. IBM, we have an application server called Liberty. We now have an open source version of Liberty. But this capability from MicroProfile 1.2, everything that you're going to hear today during this session or during Emily's coding session that follows this, they're already available. So whether you're using Open Liberty or Product Liberty from IBM, in our 3rd quarter fix pack that came out right about Java 1, we have a full supported implementation of all of these specifications. Okay, so I'm going to touch on each one of these. Configuration. The little blue boxes that are going to be displaying along here, these are the names of the features within Liberty. So just so that you're aware of the naming convention. What config allows is the ability to configure your application outside of your application. Okay, so you might have a file here, MicroProfile config properties. You may define that and have it packaged as part of your application. But then what the configuration API allows you to do is to override those properties at runtime. You do not have to rebuild your application, repackage your application. That's all done. You can deploy that to whatever environment you want, and then you can either use like system variables or environment variables, or have a separate properties file where you can override the values that are defined within your Java code. Fault tolerance. This here is going to be the focus, or the main focus, of Emily's discussion that comes after this. This is where a lot of the coding examples come into play. The idea here is to have fault-tolerant microservices. So some of the items that you are probably well familiar with, being able to do asynchronous capabilities, retry, so that you could retry the method several times in case you're having, there's some issue, so you're saying, okay, try it up to 5 times or something like that. A timeout, so maybe you've got something wrong in your code and it's taking a long time to execute. You can have a timeout that says, okay, kill that thing after a certain amount of time. A circuit breaker, so that you can actually tell it when to kill, or when to open a circuit for a particular invocation. Bulkhead, limiting the number of concurrent requests so that you don't have a method bogged down with thousands of requests and it's taking forever for it to process. You can say, oh, wait a minute, I can only take so much. And a fallback. So you could specify the capability for fallback processing. So if you have some error and you weren't really expecting it, you can define a fallback, either a method or a class, and it will execute that for you, and then you've got some means of recovering from an error. Health check and metrics. These were 2 items that were driven by Red Hat, and the first one is a very simple health check. And this is it just allows a REST endpoint so that environments like Kubernetes could do a liveness check of your application. So it can quickly check to say, okay, are you live? Are you live? Just a very simple yes, no, and then environments like Kubernetes could know whether or not to restart the application. The one that is of a little bit more interest, and this is the focus of Heiko's presentation tomorrow, is the metrics endpoint. This is where you can define additional metrics information that can be returned when pinging that endpoint. Some of the items that have been identified is, how much memory, garbage collection, the uptime, the number of threads, CPU usage and availability. All these things could come back to your application or to your dashboard so that you can monitor the services as they are running. The responses can either come back in JSON or Prometheus text formats. And there's 2 different ways of actually accessing them as well. We talked with the Drop Wizard team, and we kind of borrowed some of their ideas from their API, and there was some annotation work that the Red Hat team was doing, and so we utilized those. So if you're used to Drop Wizard metrics, and you're used to that API, you would feel very comfortable with using ours. It would be very easy to move over. Or use a new CDI-enabled annotation. Okay, in the JWT propagation, this one, it kind of humorous. At last year's Java 1, so a year ago, this was one of the items that our MicroProfile team, we were talking about, oh, we gotta have something like this. We have to have the ability for microservices to share authentication information so that if you're logged in with one microservice, then you could pass a JWT token over to another service and you're already logged in. So you can share that login information via JWT. We all thought that this was going to be relatively simple. We thought, okay, this will be in our first quarter release, we'll have it done and get it out the door. this one took a while to get it right. We had a lot of good people participating in this one, but now what we actually have defined works very well. And so the whole idea is that if you have a microservice here and it has used the capability to log in to that service, and maybe use like OpenID Connect or through your Twitter account or a separate client login, once you get your credentials, you can update your JWT token, and when this microservice calls that microservice, you can pass in that JWT token, and then this service can interrogate that JWT. He says, okay, I trust him, he's already logged in. So this is very powerful because this means not only between like two microservices that are running on Liberty instances, but we could have one running on Wildfly and one running on Liberty, and they can share that information. That's the idea, right? The microservices are supposed to be isolated and totally separate, and this really helps with that authentication mechanism. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about MicroProfile 1.3. This is what we're kind of looking at for fourth quarter. Content can still be modified. Now, the stuff here in yellow, right now I don't see that being modified. Like I said, maybe something will come up where, you know, maybe Heiko's got some ideas for metrics and we're going to update that to 1.1. I haven't heard about that yet, but, you know, always a possibility. But the new items that we're looking at is open tracing or distributed tracing, taking a look at that capability. Open API, this would be like the Swagger, and you know, Open API, the initiative to have a standardized API, and then Swagger was an implementation, and SmartBear, they were involved with this effort. They since have had a leadership change at SmartBear, and so they haven't been quite as active, but we're still continuing to push the idea in MicroProfile. And then there's a type-safe REST client that is also being proposed for MicroProfile 1.3. When we do MicroProfile 2.0, you'll notice here that we would be updating our whoops, oh, it's touchy, there we go. We would be updating these three items from Java EE7. So CDI moved up to 2.0. JAX-RS went up to 2.1. Now JSON-P had a very slight update to 1.1, and a lot of that is in support of the new JSON-B 1.0. So JSON-B is the binding part. So the JSON processing within Java EE, there were two parts to it, and the only part that got into Java EE7 was just the parsing aspect. The JSON-B does the binding, where it will bind the JSON documents to Java objects, and you kind of need both to have a complete story, and so that's what we're looking to do, is to pull that in as well. What we will do when we finally do a 2.0 release, we'll be updating our Java EE dependencies and then taking the content of whatever our current MicroProfile release is. So what I did is I just pulled in everything assuming that MicroProfile 1.3 would be complete. So that's the idea of this chart. But like I said, this is a fluid organization, it's a fluid roadmap, and we continue to evaluate this to figure out what's the proper steps. Okay, so I've talked quite a bit about MicroProfile. We really believe that the efforts that we did with MicroProfile really kind of woke up Oracle with the Java EE stuff. They, you know, maybe it's just us being kind of, you know, full of ourselves, but we feel that a lot of that is coming about from the MicroProfile efforts. So, I don't know, I know these charts, they've been used in several discussions already, but the idea is that we want to take all of Java EE8, along with support from Oracle, IBM, Red Hat, and Pyara, Tommy Tribe, everybody who is currently building Java EE application servers and move that into Eclipse. We have, just this week, we defined a new top-level project for Eclipse that passed the board's approval. It's called E4J. So if you're familiar with the organization within Eclipse, there's like the technology, there's IoT, there's a couple other top-level projects, I don't know how many, but E4J is going to be its own. Underneath that are going to be all of the projects to support Java EE8. Right now we're looking in the range, it'll probably be 40 to 50 projects within Eclipse, and each one of those projects will have several GitHub repositories. Some of them may have as many as like 8 or 10 repositories. So this is a lot of code, a lot of technology that is coming in to Eclipse. I've mentioned Java EE8 just to make sure everyone understands. Not only is that including the reference implementations, it's also going to include the TCKs. So if you're familiar with how all of this has worked in the past, Java EE, if you wanted to test your implementation to find out whether or not you're compliant with Java EE specifications, you had to work out a license deal with Oracle in order to get access to the TCKs. Some smaller organizations just either couldn't or wouldn't afford it. They didn't want to deal with that. But now, once this all gets into Eclipse, all of that is going to be open source. So we still need to define what is going to be the compatibility process, but it's going to be an open source process. It's not going to be where someone has to pay a license fee in order to get access to it. I mentioned here the microprofile innovation. This is kind of where the idea is coming from. They want to have the ability to have an environment where you can innovate and iterate faster than what we did with Java EE. We had to quickly kind of modify this because this chart, we used to have Java EE8 and then we put Java EE9 over here because we were, showing how the efforts of microprofile would eventually move into the Java EE space. And as an example, it just keeps moving on me. As an example, the config efforts that we did. Before Java EE announced that they were moving to Eclipse, we started the process of moving config. Now that one I didn't even touch. Okay, we had already started the process of creating a JSR for the configuration API. So we started that process to feed it back into Java EE. Okay, we have ghosts here. Someone is trying to do this. So now we just have to adjust this. We have to figure out what does this mean. We're still continuing with the configuration JSR. Good thing it's almost done. I wonder if it's timed. Maybe that's what's happening. Okay, so we're still continuing with the configuration JSR because we don't know exactly when we're going to complete all the efforts with the Java EE move. Well, once we do, then that's the idea, is continuing to feed the microprofile stuff into the E4J, and eventually we expect to probably integrate or merge with the E4J effort. But that's still, we still have to wait for that to happen. Okay, now I'll actually move to this. Okay, so I want to just do a plug here. I asked my previous audience, it was a different session on Java 9, how many here have heard of Open Liberty? Yeah, I know Heiko always, okay, just a handful. This is, it really was a major effort from IBM to open source their Liberty application server. Very easy, there's openliberty.io. Very easy portal to get to. We have guides, you can download binaries, we've got Docker images. You can download the source. It's all in GitHub. It's all managed by the Eclipse license. So very compatible, easy licensing. We support all of Java EE7 and all of MicroProfile up through 1.2 so far. And we're starting our development of Java EE8. So you could even monitor that activity. We're, we've got early revisions of our JAX-RS support, the JPA support, bean validation. I know Emily is very quick, or very soon we'll have CDI out there. So we're starting the Java EE8 efforts as well. And it's all open. You can monitor, you can participate. Submit pull requests if there's a new, if our documentation doesn't help, guides our problem, it doesn't matter. We'll take the input. So just a couple of URLs. MicroProfile.io is our main portal for the MicroProfile effort. Open Liberty.io, I just mentioned that one for getting access to our open source. The Eclipse Newsletter, that was highlighted at one of our sessions here. And Roxanne put together this newsletter and pulled in articles from many of the MicroProfile experts. I know Heiko has one, Emily has one. We got one from other companies, even some independents. So that whole newsletter, if you want to find out the latest on MicroProfile, that would be a good newsletter to hit up. This part here, you're not really going to understand this part yet, but this is what Emily is going to be demonstrating at the next session. So if you actually want to get the code and play with the MicroProfile examples running on top of Liberty, there's the code for it. And then we have an app accelerator. It's kind of like a getting started type tool that helps you get started with Liberty. And that's what I have. I just have a couple of minutes left for questions. Nothing? Okay, thank you very much.